Hello and welcome to the space between ideas. I'm Blaine Gates, and I just realized that it's time for me to shave. All right, let's get started. So this week I've been reading the chapters. Basically, I was reading from chapter 4 to chapter 8. Actually, I listened to chapter 8 and chapter 9 in the book Wealth and Poverty of Nations. And if you've been following along along with the videos, let me share my screen and let's get started. So here's our general. We're now in epic number 2. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. The best part about this whole process is that I'm reading constantly. And oh, what's going on? Okay. I'm just checking the audio, of course. It's pretty cool. I got these AirPods in my ear, and then now I got listen to this. Oh, perfect. Okay, it's fine. It works. Yeah, so I'm testing out a little like a new feature. Basically, the idea is that people say that you should talk in podcasts at 92 words per minute. Actually, 92 beats per minute. Now, when you're talking at 92 beats per minute, then I think the best way to do that is to listen to some music that's going at 92 beats per minute. And then slowly I'll start to change my pace so that you're able to listen to me at 92 beats per minute. Yeah, crazy, huh? Anyways, that's the idea. I'm always trying out new things. So here we are. We got here's our Epic 2. Let's make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see. Epic 2. So basically the next 9 weeks. And so today, the thing is that the plan that I'm using here is kind of weird, actually, because I jumped in, and then okay, so page 113 to 125 is actually chapter 4. It's in chapter 4. It's not in chapter 9. So I got a little bit confused. And then I realized probably we're gonna have problems with like the whole plan because I used Notebook LM to like create this whole like plan of like 7 books in 2 years. So basically, we're reading like 2 or 3 chapters a week for 2 years. Um, I don't know. Anyway, so there's some issues. We might have to make some changes along the way. My main thing is like I'm just always trying to figure out how to connect the learning from last week with the learning from this week. So this week I listened to chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I listened to it 3 or 4 times to try to get a picture of the idea, and then also with the like realizing that next week we're going to be starting chapter 1 of the China Mirage. When I was listening to the audio, I listened until basically it started talking about China. And then once it had that China overlap, so last week, remember the video last week, we were talking about how the Europeans came to Canada. Now, in this week's video, we're actually going to go like back to Columbus and the Spanish and the Portuguese. And we're going to also revisit the Chinese and their shipping industry. And so we're really going to focus on like how the world is developing, how the world is changing, and then yeah, it's going to be interesting. As you know from the first couple of videos I made, we started around like 1500 AD and talking about like how geography affects life on Earth, and then we slowly started to talk about how there was some like advantage because of the Gulf Stream that going into Europe, but they couldn't really take advantage of the nutrition, like actually they have better plant life and animal life in Europe because of the Gulf Stream, the constant rain, because of the temperate climate. But they have these huge trees. Like the trees is obvious. Like, hey, look, we have really great vegetation. So, and then it wasn't until the Iron Age that they were able to really cultivate the land. And then because they had so much extra stuff like food and animal protein, then they started to save it. And then once they could save it, then suddenly they have extra free time. This got me thinking about like governments and how, like, is it a government policy to keep your people poor? Because, you know, maybe it's actually by design. And I started thinking, what happens when people have like, I'm not talking about like really extra motivated people. I'm just talking about average people. What happens when you have extra resources? I remember when I was like 18, the first time I touched a book on economics. It was called uh, the Worldly Philosophers, and I remember there was one chapter at the first sentence. It was like, so basically, what happens with humans is that once they have like once like if they're making more money, if they go to their employer and they ask for a raise, then humans, whatever time period it was talking about, they would generally work less because they're like, I have enough stuff and like I have enough food, I have a house, I have a family, I have everything I need. Like, what am I going to do with extra money? So, like the average person, the average human, they don't know what to do with extra money, and so then they're like, well, then I'm just going to work less. And it's possible that governments actually have like a policy that they want to keep their populations relatively poor, because it's the poor that are really motivated to work. This affordability crisis, it could be by design, and that's, I mean, one potential philosophy. So anyway, so people, the engineers, the artists, they were sitting back like, hey, I got lots of food and they got machines. They started using machines. They started using water. So they would create an engine. They could use the water, and then the water is like turning some kind of thing, and then they use that thing to like grind wheat or spin some sewing machine, or like they use that, they were able to start to use engines and motors. And then somebody was like, hey, I'm a smart guy, but I can't see. And so then they're like, hey, what if we start to change the lenses so I can see a little bit clearer and I can see later on in my life? And then suddenly now they're like, they created clocks, and they could make clocks. And because the thing is, like, the more experience you have, then the more knowledge and the more value you can put back into the economy. So people, they started creating like these really, really complicated timekeeping machines, and then that really like changed society. So once they had the banks and stuff, then they were like, yeah. Anyways, let's jump into today's presentation, because some of that we're going to cover today. Now, eventually, I had a problem with this presentation because it was like there was actually, I can hear myself talking. Maybe I should click this button. Okay, so there's actually a problem because I have like from chapter 4 to chapter 7 in order to bridge the gap between the video last week and the video next week, because next week we're gonna start in China. So, anyways, so then like Claude, it created the prompt for the presentation, and then I used Notebook LM to create the presentation. But Notebook LM has an issue that it can only produce presentations that are between it prefers 15 slides. It can produce up to 20 slides. I even got one time it produced 21 slides, but I started to realize actually it doesn't even matter. Like, if you give it a prompt to create like a 33 slide presentation, it won't do it. It'll still give you 21 slides. So I don't know. So basically I had to like talk to Claude again. I showed Claude the output from Notebook LM. I'm like, this is what it created. And it's like, okay, I know what to do. So then now, so we have like chapter 4 and 5. It's in one presentation, I thought, and then chapter 6 and 7 would be in a separate presentation. I don't think that's what happened, but we got two parts. So let's start with this presentation today, and then then we got another presentation we can do next time. Columbus. So chapter 4 is interesting. It starts with it's actually talking about some really controversial stuff. It's like, hey, Christopher Columbus is not, we don't look at him the same way as that we used to. So back in the past, Christopher Columbus, like Columbus Day, was something really awesome that everybody loved. And now with like wokeness and like looking at history with a different lens, then now people are like, no, this is terrible that these Western European powers came over and they like butchered and killed all of these native people, and we need to change the way that we look at these historical things. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand that. I agree that it's hard to understand why people did those things in the past, and but we can't change the past. So the best thing to do is for us to really try to understand it and help us to understand what we can do in our life to make the world a better place. Maybe that means I'm not sure it means reparations. I think that reparations is a little bit of a strange policy where you're saying that your great great grandfather did something to my great 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 grandfather and you need to pay for it. And it's like I don't know about that. Like the issue, there's this big issue right now between Israel and Gaza and Lebanon because I'm talking to some of the people that I talk to about geopolitical issues, and I'm like, because we're like, well, like how do you frame the situation between Russia and Ukraine, and how do you frame the situation between Israel and Lebanon, and how do you frame the issue with Taiwan, America, and China? So, like, why is it okay for this to happen and not this, or why is it okay for that to happen and not that? And like, so we have all these historical issues, and so my friend's like, hey, well, Israel, this is 80 years ago. And I was like, yeah, but the thing is, like, the people who live there right now, they're not very happy about it. And then they're also not happy about the extension of this territory. So how do we try to explain the situation? And then I just realized, like, we'll always have this problem of history because the current Hezbollah fighters, they are they're not the people who fought 80 years ago. And the current Israeli fighters are not the same Israeli fighters as the guys who fought 80 years ago. The battle that they fight today is a slightly different battle than the battle that was fought 80 years ago. The battles are always changing. So I don't know. For me, it's like, let's just try to understand the best we can, because until you really understand the nuances of all the parties, then it's really hard to move forward. All right, so let's continue. Let's read this presentation, get through this, and then I can take my dog for a walk. I think it's raining, so maybe it's a good time to do a presentation. Columbus shocks the Portuguese. What is it talking about? Columbus shocks the Portuguese. So on the right-hand side, what do we got in this picture? We got Indies Occidental, island Cuba. We got Cuba. Oceano Atlantio Occidental. Occidental, I think that means west. The West Indies, the West Atlantic. We got some islands, and then what's this one over here? It looks like Africa. Okay, so it looks like the Portuguese are sailing down around Africa. Decades of methodical exploration. And then on the right, these look like they're all Spanish words. Okay, within 6 months of Columbus' return, Portugal accelerated, sending 13 ships and 1,200 men directly to India. I don't know. Let's see what's going on. The canon in terms of trade. Okay, we got a canon. Da Gama's explicit orders. If a hostile vessel approaches, stand off and blow it out of the water. Force overrides market failure. Lethal standoff range. Okay. If a hostile vessel approaches, stand off and blow it out of the water. Force overrides market failure. I have no idea what we're talking about. Maybe I should check these slides before we start making these. I mean, I remember they were talking about it. They were talking about some guy named Gama. So keep going. When the wrong goods meet the right market, the European offering, the Asian markets, the arbitrage gap, pepper cost 3 ducats in Calicut, but sold for 80 ducats in Venice. Superiority of force was required to capture the margin. Yeah, I can see how this connects with the last presentation that we were talking about, because the thing is that uh, so far in the development of my understanding of history, we're now at the point where we have banks. We have banks, right? So like we have stores, and then we have stuff in the stores, and then we represent our work, our labor, with money. So we have the ability to have some kind of abstract bartering, symbolic bartering tool. I think money is basically a ledger, and it tells you like how much value or how much energy or how much assets that you have, and then it's in a token form. And in fact, yeah. So, and then the token, it has something called assurance, and it assures the person who has access to this thing that they can trade it for something else. And when you have like a number or you have a weight, then this helps you understand exactly what you have in your hand. Like when you look at these things, you could also say like, what is the value of each of these items, and then you can use that in your trade, in your barter. So the arbitrage gap, it means that if you if you know where you can get something, for example, if I go to Alibaba, so there's a website called Alipay, Alibaba.com, and basically it's a website in China. Foreigners can jump on it, and they can buy stuff from China in bulk, and then they can then put those items onto like a different website like Amazon.com or eBay or something. And I think that there are even some websites where there's certain types of plugins. So if you find it, some kind of, if you find a store on Alibaba.com, then you can have like a direct plugin that goes into your website. And then when a customer buys something in your website, then you can actually like the order, it goes straight through your website to the Alibaba website. And then when that person makes the purchase, the seller in China, they mail it directly to your customer, and the information that's put on the package is the information of your company. So now, so the arbitrage gap is if you know where you can buy that product for cheap, and then if you have access to customers, then you can take advantage of that arbitrage gap. A portrait of a commercial civilization, 1508. Regimiento de Diego Lopez de Cerqueiro. The economy. What goods are produced? What will people take in exchange? Are things dear or cheap? Military. What military force? Are the soldiers timid or warlike? Do they cast cannons? The infrastructure. Is there money? How do they make gunpowder? What are the shipping rhythms? Yeah, so this was interesting when the monarchs of the age of in Portugal and Spain, when they started discussing trade with foreign countries, they wanted to really understand who they were working with. And this is really also my question about how developed were these societies, for example, in the 1500s? What are the things that people thought about all the time? And what are the tools that they used? And then in here, so okay, so what goods are produced? And what will people take in exchange? And are things dear or cheap? This is still a question which we're asking ourselves today. For example, I remember when I was a child and everyone was like, hey, we're going to start doing business with China, globalization, things like that. I mean, even now, I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about what are the levers that government have in order to manage their economy. So the idea is that we have something called GDP, and then we also have something called an affordability crisis. And the question is, well, wait a minute, where does the affordability crisis come from? Everybody's trying to solve the problem of the affordability crisis, including I'm trying to understand where does this affordability crisis come from. Now, in Canada, we have somebody named Mark Carney, and Mark Carney is likely one of the most qualified people to run a modern Western government. Why? Because he was the head of the the Central Bank of Canada, And then he became the head of the central bank of the UK, which means, and he was there during the time of Brexit, which means that he understands the Canadian system. The Canadian system obviously has some connection with the American system. And then he was there when the UK system was connected to the EU. And then he was there when the system was detaching from the EU. And then he was there after. So it means that he's obviously the most qualified from the perspective of banking to start to think about policies for how Canada should consider its relationship with the United States and with the EU. Because like the thing is, like, you hear the other guy, Pierre Poilievre, and he's kind of like, Carney moves so slow. And it's like, my problem with Carney is not that he moves too slow. My problem with Carney is that he moves too fast. So, I mean, like, because the thing is, like, if you have a magician, there's this thing we call sleight of hand. And it's like, the question is, like, why is it that his investment company shows up like the day after or the day before when Carney is traveling around the world? So that's the question. It's like, is Carney too fast or is he too slow? I think the biggest issue is he's too fast. And I think that he's so fast that a guy like Pierre Poilievre, he doesn't even know where to look. Like, so Pierre Poilievre, he runs into the room and he's just like, what's going on in here? And then Carney's like sitting there like, what do you mean what's going on in here? Like, there's a lot of things going on, but the thing is that Pierre doesn't know, he doesn't even know where to look. He's like, something's going on. It's like when your mom comes into your room and she's like, what's going on in here? And it's like, well, you think I'm going to admit what I'm doing in here? Come on. If you don't know, then you don't know. That's my issue. It's like, and that's why I'm spending so much time thinking about these things. Like, so anyway, so China starts sending goods our way. And what's the question? So the question is like, okay, so why do you think there wouldn't be an affordability crisis? What do you think's happening? So we're buying cheap Chinese goods, and there's two things that happen when you buy cheap Chinese goods. So it means that the Canadian workers, we need to put them into some category of goods that we are uniquely positioned to produce. And if China can produce everything that we can produce for cheaper, then it's likely that their products are going to start to compete with everything that we have in our economy. And if their products can compete with everything that we have in our economy but cheaper, then it sounds like eventually then we have to work for the same wages as the Chinese are working in order for the products that we're producing to be cheaper. Right? So what's the affordability crisis? The affordability crisis is that our wages are not keeping up with costs or something like this. Like, the thing is, like, I don't know. I just, like, that's the whole point of doing these deep dives, is try to figure out what's going on. All right. So reading a civilization through its curiosity, what the Portuguese asked and what they did not ask. So the Portuguese asked trade goods and local pricing, military capacity and troop temperament, currency system and infrastructure, gun making capabilities, seasonal shipping patterns. What they didn't ask: deep religious beliefs, philosophical traditions, family structures, local art and literature. What a civilization asks a new a new people reveals exactly what kind of civilization is doing the asking. This is another point. So let's think about Donald Trump. And the thing is that I think that Donald Trump's worldview is basically like, if we're going to compete, and if I can pull out a knife in a street fight and stab you, then, like, that's your fault. This is a street fight. So what? So it's like, let's do a gentleman fight, like they're like putting their fists up like this. Donald Trump is like, hey, if we're in a fight, this is a fight. So then you swing, and then he just turns and stabs you with a knife. And you're like, you are not a gentleman. You have stabbed me with a knife. And it's like, yeah, but like, if you don't like, I can do what I want. I can do whatever I want. And if you don't have the ability to defend yourself, if you can't play my game, so then the question is, why does anyone play a game with Donald Trump if he's like constantly going to be ripping people off? And then, well, the thing is that when you get to the levers of power, like the levers of like country to country power, then you're now at a position. See, when you talk about the police power, in a country, we have something called the police power, which means that if somebody breaks the law, then we have the police that are able to go and mitigate, and we have the judicial system that can go in and mitigate. So you have some kind of reprisal, is that the word? Before the law. You can go and you can call the police. But then when you have a country to country negotiation, there's no police officer. There's like the world of public opinion, and then there's propaganda, but then at the end of the day it's like there's force. So like why would Iran ever give up its nuclear capacity? It doesn't even make sense. So there's two things that are true. Number one, Iran is not going to admit that they are developing a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to admit whether or not they even have a nuclear weapon. They already have a nuclear weapon. That's the thing. It's like what do you mean they don't? Oh, they're 60% of the way there. Okay, so how do you get from 60% to whatever amount of like nuclear material you need in order to like to build a nuclear bomb? Like what? It's like it's the same process. They already have the process. Now what? It's just a matter of time. It means they already have a nuclear weapon. They already have. And if they didn't have, they have access to their allies. They have Russia, they have China. So first of all, they already have a nuclear weapon, but they can't admit it because they don't want to admit it. Because once you admit that you have a nuclear weapon, then it creates all these issues in the Middle East. Like, okay, now Saudi Arabia wants a nuclear weapon and UAE wants a nuclear weapon. And we don't really want these guys who are like constantly blowing each other up to have nuclear weapons. I guess that's the argument. Everybody knows that Israel has tons and tons of nuclear weapons, but then they don't really want to like admit to it. So, and they don't have to. Why? Because they have like a good enough relationship with the United States that they've already like said this is our policy on the topic and we're not going to change it. So that's just the way it is. Like, why is it that like there's all these people complaining that like there's some kind of genocide being committed in Gaza? Some people say yes, some people say no. Like every day, Lebanese people are being murdered and land is being taken, and like, so who's going to stop them? That's the question: is who's going to stop them? And the issue right now with Donald Trump and Iran is like Iran, they proved that they could survive, and then they took the Straits of Hormuz. Like in 16, so the Portuguese had control of the Straits of Hormuz, and then in 1622, the Persians took back control. So that's the thing. It's like Persia again has taken back control of the Straits of Hormuz. These are just cycles, and they proved that they could get through the crisis, and that's what it means to work with Donald Trump. Now the thing is that like I think in the current American government, I mean, did you watch that movie about Donald Trump where basically he was portrayed as a guy in New York who had access to some guy, I guess his name was Cohen or something. And then they were like, here's the rules of engagement. And then they had like microphones in everybody's houses. And then, so the thing is like everybody is doing stuff that they don't want the public to know. And then, so they record all of these people doing stuff that they don't want the public to know. And then they go and they call them and say, hey, look, we got this audio tape. So they have this leverage. They're playing a game that everybody else doesn't know is being played. It's like the same thing. When I went to Hollywood, I noticed that as soon as you walk into Hollywood, there's people taking your picture immediately. And you go to an event, let's say that you hold like a bottle of alcohol, like a glass of alcohol, or you put a cigarette in your mouth, there's somebody there taking pictures of you. Doesn't matter if you're famous, they're taking pictures of everybody all the time. And then after like, to become an overnight sensation in Hollywood takes 10 years. So 10 years later, then you become famous. And then suddenly they're like, hey, check out these pictures. And then you're like, hey, what's up with those pictures? And they're like, hey, I'll sell these pictures to you for $1,000. It's like, no. And like, well, then I'm going to publish them. Okay, here's $1,000. And then a month later, like, all right, so it looks like you're willing to pay me $1,000. So let's do this gig where you're going to pay me $1,000 every month. And it's like, what? I didn't even know we were playing this game. And that's the game that Donald Trump plays. And so you have all these folks in Washington, D.C., everybody's corrupt and everybody is dirty and everybody has their hands are dirty. And so like whoever has access to that data, and then you have your your clubs, there's like a lot of different types of clubs of people that they come to some agreements about what they're going to be doing, and how they agree to things, and how they're going to protect each other, and how they can make changes to policy, and how they can do business, and there's agreements, and we don't see any of this stuff. What game are you playing? So some people know how to play this game. They know how to play the game of power. They know how to play the game of conquer, and some people don't. Probably the worst problem Pierre Polyev has is he's just too innocent. You know, he's just a kid. He wants to do a good job. He wants the world to be a good place, and that's his sin. He didn't join some club of some what do they call him, Epstein. He didn't join some Epstein club and get secret access. Two theories of empire. So what about empire, a couple hundred years ago? So Spain has an empire of possessions, and Portugal is an empire of information. Okay, Spain built dominion by asserting material facts. Portugal built global corporate dominance by securing recurring monopolies on information. The same story at a catastrophic scale. The collision of a gift economy with an optimized monetary economy compressed into a single generation of a continental scale. What is going on? I have no idea what you're talking about. All right, so hunting. Okay, we'll start with hunting. So I think this is probably like not 100 years ago or hundreds of years ago. This is more like thousands of years ago. So at some point, humans were animals. Now, of course, if you're a religionist, then you believe that Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden at 4000 BC. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a religious person. I don't have a problem with that, because in the Bible, it says that God blew the spirit into man. So my assumption, because the other problem is, like, where did these dinosaur bones come from? So obviously, if you have dinosaur bones, then if you have fossils, then there was millions and millions of years, right? And then at some point, then the Earth is in its current form, and then humans. There's some kind of humanoid that, like, we had some development. Our brains developed somehow, and but at some point we were animals, and then our ancestors eventually they developed these abilities. For example, obviously hunting if they're animals, but then eventually they learned how to trade. Now, one form of trade is quite simple. I think almost all animals engage, many animals, I shouldn't say almost all, many animals, particularly monogamous animals, engage in this form of trade. I mean, I got birds outside. I noticed that, like, so there's like one bird that's like, "Wah, wah, wah, wah." It's usually the female bird. And then the male bird is like, okay, okay. And then it's a magpie. So they go and fly, they get some mud, they bring it back, and then they put it on the wall. And then the female bird's like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." And then the male bird goes out and gets more of the mud and then brings it and puts it on the wall. And it's like, it's crazy, right? So this is a form of trade. Communication, a social contract, is a form of trade. Like the concept of trade comes from the idea of assurance. Like I can be relatively assured that you are going to give me something, and then you're going to get something in return. Now, eventually, hunting, they started to develop tools. So then once you have tools, then you can get more. You can get more. Now that produces a surplus. Once you have a surplus, then you need to have storage. And then once you have a storage, then contract. So then we have something called a contract. I think that the contract is like, okay, so there's different types of contract once you have storage. For example, maybe someone's paid to watch the storage. Someone's paid to build the storage. Someone is so, but then once you have payment, so the contract is the concept of assurance is both the contract, the agreement, and also then the money, which is the ledger. You have the agreement, and then you have the ledger. This is so when they're talking about cryptocurrency and how cryptocurrency is like programmable money, they're saying that the token is both the ledger and the contract. Now, once we move into finance, then this is when we start to discuss different elements of debt. So remember, we talked about debt is pulling some future value and bring it into today. It's like, it's alchemy. It's bringing gold from the future, bringing it in today and saying, hey, listen, like right now, so in my house, we like to cook food, and then we talked to one of our neighbors across town, and then they said they like to eat food, but they don't like to cook food. So I could deliver that food to their house, but the problem is it takes so long to get there. It's just not really worth it. By the time I get there, the food's cold, and then like the amount of compensation is not enough. But if I had a bicycle, then I could just ride it there and be back. The food would still be hot when I deliver it. I can get back, and it only takes a total of like 15, 20 minutes. The amount they're willing to pay me, it's worth it. So if you give me the money right now, then I'm going to engage in this business, and then after like 2 months, so I'm going to make regular payments to you, and then after 2 months I will have paid off the principal, and then I'm going to pay off some interest, and then so I'm, instead of saving money. But the thing is, I can't really, how do I save money? So if I don't have the ability to save money, maybe I'm even unemployed, I don't have the ability to create this additional this surplus. So because I need the surplus in order to buy the bicycle, and I can't do that because this business opportunity requires the upfront payment of money to buy the bicycle, and I don't have the bicycle. Right? So this is the idea of finance. Then now the concept of debt, then you can multiply it once you get into the area of like so, well, we talked about this in another video, but basically, like, so let's say I borrow $100 of gold. So then I use the $100 of gold. I buy a bicycle. So he gives me the bicycle. I give him the $100 of gold. Then he takes the gold. He brings it back to the bank, and he puts it in a savings account. So because he doesn't need the $100 of gold right now, maybe he only needs $20 of gold. He's going to go and he's going to buy materials to make another bike. The remaining of his gold is just going to stay in the bank. So then the bank, it's like, hey, well, we can lend out this money again. So then we have these, like, if you have fractional reserve lending, then it means that you can lend out, like, you can create multiple futures, like all of these multiple. Anybody who has a business idea, come to the bank, tell us your business idea. If we agree, we'll give you the money. So this is the thing, is like people who work in the bank, what they're doing is they're thinking about like future business opportunities. They're constantly discussing, how do we create future business opportunities? That's finance. And then eventually monopoly. So monopoly, it's like, all right, so then we eventually we control, we have an agreement with all of the people who are working in this area, and maybe there's one or two people who are not in our little club, and then what we do is we come to some agreement with each other, and then we go and talk to the people who create material. Like if you go into Porter's 5 forces, then you could look at like the 2 of the forces are related to like how much money you can get from the customer, and then how much money do you have to give to the suppliers. So those are 2 of Porter's 5 forces. And if we have a secret club and we agree with each other about like who's allowed to like purchase supplies from the sourcing, the places that are producing raw materials, and then we say, hey, look, there's that one guy, and like we don't want you to sell to him anymore. And then they say, well, but he buys a lot, so like if you don't want him to buy, then you have to give us some kind of benefit. So like, okay, well, we'll pay together. We're going to pay you an extra 10%, and then you're going to refuse selling to him. And then what happens is eventually that guy goes out of business because he doesn't have any more raw materials. So he has to get his raw materials from a really far place, and then he brings it back. And then now the cost of his bicycles are more expensive. And then eventually nobody buys his bicycles because they're too expensive. So they only buy our bicycles. So our club, our secret club, is what enables us to develop some kind of monopoly. The greatest fleet the world had seen, Zhenghe treasure ship, 400 feet long. The fleet was 317 vessels, 28,000 men in 1405. Columbus Santa Maria was 85 feet long in 1492. So certainly sounds like China was really big at that time and had really developed. Yeah, so as you know, we talked about China a little bit in the past, and the shape and structure of their society. Now it looks like they have more productive capacity in China. I think it's an element of their agriculture. Like, I don't know the actual answer, but it seems as though it has something to do with their agriculture. So if we look, for example, if we look at the Europeans, they have really, really great, nutritious, fertile soil, and it produces animals and food, and so they had like this abundance. And but then with their abundance, like, what did they create with that abundance in comparison to the Chinese, who, it, like, people were constantly working. Like, the amount of work that you had to do to grow the rice was significant, and if you stopped working, then you were like kicked out of the tribe. Like, you're gone, you're done, we need workers. And so they would just kept having more children, and they the mentality was like, have more kids, and then your kids are going to be able to work. And then, but then the thing is that you can only produce like 10% or 15%, or I don't know what the percentage, but some percentage more than you consume. But so, and then it's like you can never rest, because like the moment you stop working, then you don't have enough food to live. And so they didn't have the same situation as the Europeans, who were able to produce like a huge surplus, and then with that surplus, then then they could sit back and do nothing, or they could like fill a boat full of stuff, and then they could go to another country, or like, so they were, everybody was trying to strike it rich. Whereas in China, they were like, they were working for the sake of work. I mean, I don't know the answer. Those are just some of the impressions I get as I'm reading these ideas. The fatal flaw of treasure fleet. On the left, we got ceremonial objective, and then on the right, we got commercial objective. History ultimately sided with the margin, not the spectacle. Okay, so we got the Chinese on the left side. So the Chinese, they built a ship, and then they went out, and then they just collected all kinds of weird stuff, and they brought it back and said, "Hey, look at this." So it's like, it sounds like the Chinese is like a Liu Yo Tuan. They're like a travel group, and then they came back and they're like, "Man, that was such a waste of money." And then, but then the Europeans, they were always trying to do business. Bureaucratic erasure of ambition. 1436, request for a new shipyard. Craftsmen explicitly refused. Okay, we got 4,000. What's this one? We got 1405. They have the biggest ship in the world. And then 30 years later, they want to build another like another shipyard, and then the leader says no. Yeah, they mentioned this story, like, so that the leader, he actually like burned the request, and he like made it disappear. 1500, building a ship with more than two masts becomes punishable by death. Coastal authorities ordered to destroy all ocean-going ships. Going to the sea on a multi-masted ship, even for trade, became a crime. Sounds like people are trying to escape. This is the Chinese philosophy. Nobody's escaping. Same tools, radically different outcomes. Technology. So this is comparing the Chinese. So on the center column, it says Chinese institutional application. And then on the right, it says European institutional application. Gunpowder, for example, in the first row. For the Chinese, it was a spectacle, a noise, a psychological effect. On the right, we have European institutional application, lethal, standoff, range, global foreign policy. On the left, we have printing. So in China, it's state-controlled preservation of orthodoxy. On the right, European institutional application, uncontrollable continent-wide information contagion. Yeah, so this goes back to something that came out earlier, which is that in Europe, because everybody was kind of like prospering, they had the ability to store up some value. They were able to live without central control. So this, once you can live without central control, and you have a surplus, then it means that your creative people can be more creative. In China, it's like so hard to produce a surplus, and then the central government was always taking advantage of whatever surplus there was, and then so then they needed to control the printing at the same time. Iron production, achieve coal smelting early, then abandon it, while in Europe they compounded into the Industrial Revolution. Spinning machines processed 500 years early, never adapted for factories, and then in Europe scaled into mass textile industrialization. So this is an interesting topic, which is like, why is it that some remember, because we began with the concept of geography, but now we're not in the same world as geography anymore, because once you're in the world of surplus, then it's about making decisions. And it looks like so for example, with gunpowder, it would seem as though you don't really want your population to have access to gunpowder in the form of a weapon. And then in Europe, they're like, okay, so one guy figures out how to use it in a weapon, and then another guy has to use it in a weapon to defend himself. So, like, you can even see, like, the European Union, it's a collection of independent states, and these states are kind of warring against each other. Whereas in China, if you, if you look at Qin Shi Huang, then this is like, I don't know, what was it, like 200 BC is when the five countries, I guess the six countries became one. So they've been one country for like 2,000 years, whereas the European Union has been like a union for, I don't even know how long it's been. What, it's been 30 years, 40 years or something? I have no idea. And then America has been the United States for just a couple of hundred years. So state control seems as though that state control is like the worst thing you can do for development. Totalitarian state as innovation killer. There you go. So there you go. Totalitarian state is a innovation killer. The state kills progress not just by banning it, but by creating an atmosphere of routine immobility where any private initiative is inherently suspect. Exactly. Architecture of the silk ceiling. The silk ceiling, three interlocking institutional constraints. No free market, arbitrary seizure, bribery, and state targeting of successful merchants. Guard Iliad, gilded, guard, what does that even say? Three types of no one to rumpus state control, gender constraints, confinement of female labor made European-style textile factory models impossible, total state control, a providential state that preemptively neutralized disruption, private initiative, three types of. I don't remember when this was in the book. I listened to it 3 times. I don't remember this. The greatest counterfactual in history. Chinese burns, real timeline, Portugal rounds Africa, 1430s turning point, the counterfactual. History hinged on a narrow window. Had China not chosen to stop, arriving Europeans would have encountered a naval superpower already ruling the oceans. Yeah. So they actually messed up their own process, their own progress. The central government, when they decided to turn inward, and they did this a number of times in their history, where they just decided to turn inward and close the borders. What about now? I talk to like 3 or 4 people every week, Chinese people, and they work in logistics, and I ask them questions about logistics. Like one guy, he works for Amazon, and I was asking him like, what's going on with the Chinese sellers? He's like, yeah, a lot of companies, they have stopped shipping to Saudi Arabia and UAE. And then yeah, we talked about so he does sales, so he's constantly trying to sign up new suppliers to the Amazon company. We came up with like a strategy. The strategy came from, I have another lady I talked to, she's Chinese, but she's in Japan, and then she's sourcing pharmaceutical chemicals from China, selling to the United States. And she's going to go to San Diego in July, and there's some kind of like conference for companies who want to source pharmaceutical components from from Asia, and she's like, it's really hard to find customers because, you know, it's like we buy our chemicals, we buy them directly from China. So yeah, I said like maybe the strategy is that you want to get that paperwork started. Let's get that paperwork started, something like that, right? Like, let's get that paperwork started. And then they're like, what do you mean get the paperwork started? The thing is that like it's going to take between 6 months and a year for us to finish the paperwork and to get through with the FDA and with the port authorities and all the different organizations who have to understand our logistics process and our product and all that stuff, the banks. So I said, like, when you meet some American, what you can say is, hey, listen, like, so sometimes the relationship between America and China is difficult. And right now it seems like we're in a short period of peace where Trump is like, it seems as though he recognizes that China has significant leverage. But, the United States is working overtime to figure out how they can gain leverage because you can see very clearly that they do not have the power that they thought they would have in Ukraine. They do not have the power that they thought they would have in Iran. And so they're not willing or able to go to war against China. It's just impossible. I mean, after 4 years of the Ukrainian conflict, like, great, you got pretty good drones now and you got AI drones, but guess what? Like, so does Russia. And then after like attacking Iran twice, you got pretty good missiles, but yeah, guess what? So does Iran. And then, so how are you going to fight China? America, you're not what you thought you were. You're not even close to what you thought you were. So they're like working like crazy to try to like compete to get back to a point that they can get back to the unipolar moment. And we're like, that ship has sailed. One technology, two destinies. Yeah. So I mean, so then the sales point that I talked to the lady in Japan about was like, okay, so when you talk to guys in San Diego, just tell them like, hey, let's just do one shipment. Like, just give us like 5% of your source. Like, we will supply you with 5% of the stuff that you need. And yeah, okay, it's twice the price as the stuff from China, and it's exactly the same product. What are the benefits from working with us? Number one, we have a better process for guaranteeing that you're going to get the thing that you ordered. We're taking on significant risk. If any time the Chinese send us stuff and it's substandard, then we don't accept it, or we're going to bite the cost. But then when you buy from us, you're paying basically 20% for the same goods. And they're like, okay, but we'll take on the risk. All right, but what happens when there's a problem with tariffs, or there's a problem if there's a ban, or if there's like some other regulation that comes up and suddenly you can't get anything from China? So wouldn't it be nice if the paperwork was already done? You call us and say, hey, we need a shipment, and then boom, we put that into your we put that on the ship, and it's there in a couple of weeks, right? So then the guy from China who's working for Amazon, I said, that's your sales pitch. That's the same sales pitch. All these guys that are like, you're trying to sign people up, and then but you're trying to show them. So there's another lady, she's working in logistics also. She's telling me like a 20-foot container, the average cost was between $1,000 and $1,200 4 months ago, and then you can see how it steadily has moved up to like 2,500 and then 3,000. And she's like, I see it going up to 4,000 per container. And then all these suppliers, they're like, there's no way I'm going to sign up to this. Why would I sign up to this? I'm not going to do business with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And it's like, okay, like, you don't have to do business with them right now, but at least let's get that paperwork started, because then in the future, after the war is over, at least you have all the paperwork done. So it's an option. It's like buying an option, right? So there is still like an argument that you can put in place. Yeah. So that, lots of interesting people in China these days that I'm talking to. So we got the state-controlled preservation of orthodoxy, Europe detonating the intellectual landscape. Yeah. The world passes by. Isolationism became China, while the celestial empire chose stillness and harmony. The Atlantic world chose relentless motion. The Great Divergence, European fragmented power and open competition, China unified totalitarian bureaucracy. What lies behind the wall? To understand the modern economic world, we must go inside the civilization that had every advantage yet chose to stop. Next, the Chinese paradox. It's not actually true. The next is not the Chinese paradox, but this is the problem with these AI tools, is that if you don't prompt them correctly, you might have like a bad situation. Chinese silk ceiling, the European engine. European arrived with the entire ladder. Containment, contagion, gunpowder. This is the same Crusades as an institutional template. Okay, what's this one? Okay, the Crusaders carried crosses. The accounting was always in ducats. The Crusades established the lasting habit of state-blessed, privately financed expansion towards profitable targets. This specific fusion produced a template for the trading companies and the colonies. The Holy Cover. The medieval Europe accumulated a dangerous surplus of trained warriors bound by feudal loyalty with no productive outlet. A holy cause was required to mobilize them. Oh no, the Crusades. 8 centuries of warfare produced an unemployed class. All right, so there is some change. Yeah, this is a little bit different. All right, we'll talk about this one. Maybe I'll make another video in a couple days, and we'll do part 2. All right, good. Nice to see you guys today, and it's time for me to run with the dog. So thanks for joining. I'll catch you next time.